Good afternoon and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management Webinar Series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen. I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center and will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero and Savannah Batowski of the National Recycling Coalition for assisting the RMC with webinar promotion and technical support. Today's webinar will provide an update on current market conditions for recycled PET plastics, as well as the challenges faced by the PET recycling industry. Our presenter today is Kate Eagles, who I will introduce in a moment. Following her presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you're experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that an edited version of this webinar will be made available for viewing via YouTube links on the National Recycling Coalition and Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Kate Eagles is the Program Director for the National Association for PET Container Resources, also known as NAPCOR, who is a trade organization for the PET packaging industry in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Kate manages technical reporting and communication efforts for the organization and has served NAPCOR in various roles for over 10 years. Kate's current work scope includes production of the annual post-consumer PET recycling rate report, tracking domestic PET processing capacities, material flow, end markets, and furthering the promotion of PET and its sustainable attributes. Kate previously worked for More Recycling Associates, a consulting firm specializing in plastics recycling. Before making the move to plastics packaging and recycling, she worked in a variety of food, beverage, and tabletop marketing and public relation roles. Okay, now I'm going to turn the program over to Kate.
Thank you very much, Wayne. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Let me just get my system going here. There we go. As Wayne mentioned, I am Kate Eagles. I'm very pleased to be here, and let's get going. I am going to give a brief introduction to NAPCOR today, a little bit about who we are, and give you some recycling context, PET recycling context, that is. Talk about the markets a little bit, the recycling rates, etc. From there, we'll go into a few of the market challenges, and as Wayne mentioned, some initiatives to address those challenges, focusing on quality and supply. Listed a few of them there. We'll go through some specific projects to sort of let you know how NAPCOR is addressing these issues. A little bit about NAPCOR. We are the trade association for the PET packaging industry. We hover at about 51 members. We're a member organization. Those are our member categories that just appear there in the hexagons on the right. To give a little more detail around this, very busy slide, but that gives you a sense of our member base. Just a couple of things to mention by PET reclaimers, because I'll use that word during the presentation. By that, NAPCOR defines that as organizations that at least wash post-consumer PET. Of course, many of them take it all the way through from a PET bale to an end product, a carpet or a bottle. But all of those companies at least wash post-consumer PET. Supplier members can be anything from colorants to recycling machinery manufacturers to resin precursor manufacturers. So all kinds of suppliers to the PET industry. That's a bit about our membership. Very briefly, our mission is basically to promote and protect the package and to articulate the attributes of the PET package as a sustainable package. You might note that sort of yellow lozenge in the corner there. We celebrate our 30-year anniversary as an organization this year, and so we'll be marking the occasion in 2017. So that's a little bit about NAPCOR. Let's talk a little bit about PET and recycling and markets. So if you look at this chart, let me back up for just a moment and say one of our flagship reports, and many of you may be familiar with it, is the PET Container Recycling Rate Report. The most recent of those is the 2015 report, which was released in mid-October of 2016. That report and many previous year's reports are available on our website. If anyone has yet to check those out and is curious, they're there. So on this chart in front of you now, the green recycling rate is basically the volume of post-consumer PET material collected in the United States as a fraction of the total PET available for recycling in the U.S. A simple fraction converted to a percentage, so we're hovering now at 30 to 31%, our PET recycling rate in the U.S. So the purple bar is what we call the PET material utilization rate. It's maybe a little bit of a different use of that term, utilization. By this, we mean the volume of clean recycled PET flake produced as a fraction of the total PET available for recycling in the U.S. So we don't expect the purple and the green percentages to be the same, although the rate calculation for a processed clean flake will be lower. But the rate differential did track quite consistently, as you'll see, in 2001, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to around 2007, 2008, when we see that purple utilization rate begin to fall away from the recycling rate. So what does that mean? It means the material being processed stopped yielding as much flake as it once did, or put another way, our PET reclaimers are having to process more material to get the same amount of clean flake out of that material. So their yields are going down. Looking at another aspect of the market, which is the reclamation capacity in the U.S. When we say reclamation capacity, we mean the amount of raw material, the amount of post-consumer PET in bales, mostly bales in dirty flake form, that our domestic U.S. reclaimers take in annually, the capacity to do so. So right now, if you look at December 2015, we have about 28 plants operating in the U.S., or at the end of 2015, that was the case. The slide says major assets. To be more accurate, this is all assets. Some are small, some are large, but about 28 in total. That's the number of plants. The capacity is right around a little above 2.5, about 2.7 billion pounds, or 2,700 million pounds. That's the amount of material, all combined, that these plants have the capacity to process in a year. Now, is every plant always operating at full capacity? No, they're not. You may recall, actually I hadn't mentioned it, but in the recycling rate context, this for 2015, we collected about 1.8 billion pounds of material in this country. So you can see we have, if you look at where that would fall on this chart, we have the capacity to process more material than we are typically collecting. As mentioned, not all plants always run at full capacity, and we do import some material to fill those gaps. But the point of this slide really is to show that our domestic infrastructure is really quite robust. Certainly this last year has been challenging market-wise, but we certainly have a robust domestic infrastructure and the ability to process a lot of PET material recycled and collected in the United States. So what happens to that material that is collected, processed, and converted into clean flake? It goes into domestic end markets. And here are the categories into which that material is manufactured. You can see over the years we've had some growth. Fiber has come back in recent years. You can see sheet and film, that olive green category has grown. That pale gray food and beverage bottle category has certainly grown over the years. But in general, end market growth has been quite significant from the time of this graph, 2004, the early in this graph, to 2015. So what do these three slides sort of lead us or tell us? So recycled material collection is hovering around about 31%. That's the rate, PET recycling rate in the United States. Yield from that material has decreased. The PET reclamation infrastructure in the U.S. is solid and could process more domestic material than we're collecting. We have that capacity. And markets are strong. But certainly there's room for growth. We saw them falling off just a little bit in 2015. There's certainly room for growth. So our overarching goal here, really increasing supply while reducing contamination in the stream. So increasing high quality supply is our overarching goal. So let's walk through some of the ways that we approach this goal. And this is specific to 3 projects that I'll talk about a little bit more in the next few minutes. And 3 projects that correspond to some of the ways we thought we might impact the marketplace and work to achieve the goal of more supply and better quality supply. So if you look at market signals, we looked at bale specifications and gradings to help drive some quality. If you look at design for recycling, we look at that sort of with everything we do and think about how we can support better design for recycling to encourage consumer product goods companies to design containers to ensure they can be recycled and reclaimed and reused in an end market product. End market evaluation. There's a lot of non-traditional streams. We're going to talk about 2 of them today. Non-traditional being non-bottle and non-clear, colored PET. So how do we look at those emerging streams and as part of our mission, overcome obstacles to their successful introduction and recycling? So looking at those 3 approaches to the market. So starting with the first one mentioned, how to address bale quality. So we mentioned earlier the yield has declined over time. The amount of clean flake we're getting out of material collected has declined. So what affects the quality of the bale? Well, a lot of things affect the quality of the bale. As you all well know, a lot of collection programs have gone to single stream. That's good in terms of volumes, and there are a lot of other positives there. It does mean there are a lot of things to sort through in that stream. Proliferation of packaging of all types, and you get all types and all kinds of things in those bins. Not all PET packages reflect good design for recyclability guidelines. So you may have aggressive labels or adhesives. You may have barrier layers that protect your package. You may have metal rings from the caps that are difficult to remove for PET reclaimers. Those things all impact yield. And ongoing lightweighting. Lightweighting is a really positive thing for sustainability and means less use of resins to package goods. But it also means that when those containers get sorted at the MRF, they're so light they tend to go with the 2-dimensional things like paper, not always, but sometimes. So at the MRF level, they can get misdirected. Once they get to a PET reclaimer, it does take a lot more processing to get that same pound of clean flake generated. And every point in a process, you lose a little bit of material. So while the lightweighting is a good thing, it does affect yield. So we looked at, well, okay, so what are we going to do about this? And a couple of years ago, we looked at, well, let's start with encouraging a common understanding of what's in a bale and how we might look to measure that. And based on that, we developed a bale grading system and a material testing or audit tool to go along with that. And the objective, we worked on this for a couple of years, and the objective really was, well, let's at least get a consistent way of talking about bale quality, a clear pathway for potential improvement. Let's make sure that the industry is comfortable with it. We talk it through, we work it through. These are voluntary standards. They're meant to be fluid. In other words, if something isn't working very well or merits a change over time, it should be changed to reflect best practice in the industry. These bale guidelines are pretty common. Bale guidelines, model bale specifications have been commonly used and are commonly used, as you know. The gradings was something we added in there. The gradings there in the orange circle. And so this revised model bale spec with the gradings incorporated was approved by NAPCOR and the APR in 2015. So it's been out in use for about a year now. And the way we did it, not to get too far into the weeds here, but the way we did this was really to focus on the total PET fraction. Figuring that was the most simple way to do this. If you start talking about yields, everyone measures yields slightly differently in their process. But if you look at total PET fraction, all that is by weight, before you process that bale, how much PET is in that bale as a percentage of the total weight sampled. We developed 4 grades. So we initially had more, but over the time and working through this, 4 grades was deemed the easiest to work with. We did have a few things that we left in the check with your buyer category, and those were other colored PET containers, non-clear or light blue, and non-bottle PET thermoforms. That gives a little bit more detail of the grading section there and how we came to that. As mentioned, accompanying that was a Bale testing or a Bale or load testing or audit tool, and again, a very simple worksheet, just looking at what is the fraction of PET as a percentage of the total weight, and that would give you your grading percentage. So where did that take us? Did these newly posted model Bale specifications with the gradings and the Bale audit test method change everything? Well, perhaps not yet. But having said that, they did give us something for our reclaimers to talk to their customers about. They gave us a good way to start the conversation, and they gave us some common terminology and means of assessing, at least to start talking about. They also gave us a chance to talk more formally to MRF and MRF organizations about Bale quality. So we did that last year. We talked to the MRF committees from both the Recycling Partnership and the National Waste and Recycling Association. And interestingly enough, they came, the one question that resonated with us at NAPCOR is they said, well, what's changed over time? Can you show us some data? What's actually different? And this really got us thinking about how we were approaching this. We think, okay, yields down, it must be more contamination in the bale. Well, that's part of it. But I think we started to think about it as a more complex issue and started to sort of pull it apart and look at it more closely. So we do have quite a bit as NAPCOR of Bale composition data. We have for the past at least 8 years now, but just about every year, we take apart between 15 and 21 bales, and we look at what's in those bales. So we did have data that we looked at. So what's changing out there? And we tried to sort of take a more nuanced view on Bale quality, which we continue to work through today. Certainly, we want to continue to talk to our MRF partners about flow, where's the material going in the MRF, sorting, best practice to get best quality bales because that benefits all of us. Design for recyclability, insofar as we're able to work with brand owners directly and work with partner organizations such as the Association of Plastic Recyclers, the APR. We want to encourage design for recyclability whenever possible. And acknowledging and trying to better understand changes in the marketplace. Again, we're going to talk about thermoforms and non-clear material. We also just mentioned lightweighting. All of these things do impact yield. And I think as we dig into this, we understand that this conversation is perhaps more challenging and more nuanced than we first thought, and we continue to pursue this. Sorry, my system's a little stuck here. Bear with me a minute. Oh, there we go. Okay, well, let's look at one of these non-traditional streams that I've mentioned. I mentioned earlier our overarching goal was to improve quality and improve supply and improve quality supply. So along those lines, we acknowledged at NAPCOR that there were more non-clear or colored package introductions in PET going into the marketplace. Still a relatively small part of the stream coming back through the recycling system, but nonetheless a growing stream and something we wanted to make sure we were on top of and ahead of as it started to come to the recycling start to come back into the recycling bins as to what kind of markets would be available for these streams. How do we support those markets? How do we identify obstacles to recovering this material? So what did we do on this? Just very briefly, we certainly collected data about how much of the stream this was at the moment. Small part of the stream right now, 2 or 3%, expecting to get a little higher, but still probably below 5% of the incoming recycling stream. Develop projections for how will this grow in the near future? What do we need to look for? Where does this material? How does this travel right now through MRFs and reclaimers? And I'm going to diagram that in just a minute. We looked at if you have a mixed color stream material, a flake material of this stream. What was it like? What was in there? What did we have to look at in terms of potential contaminants or potential obstacles to having this meet end market specifications? End markets. Could we get enough of this material to an end market? How do we support end markets? Were there end markets that just required a little further evaluation or testing to be more viable? What were those? New technologies would be another thing there. I mentioned material flow. You know, a PET bottle comes to the MRF and it's pretty clear where it goes. A colored PET bottle, maybe a health and beauty item or a household cleaner, it may not always travel the same path. It might make it into a PET bale, or it might make it into a mixed rigid bale, or somebody might be hand sorting it. It might look like an HDPE bottle. It might go into the HDPE bale, or it might get thrown out. Once it gets to the PET reclaimer, similarly, it might find an end market. It might be remarketed in an outthrow bale to a PERF or other organization. It might be exported, or something else. It might, another outcome might occur. So that's what we meant by determine pathways of material flow, to determine, well, right now, how much of that material is out there and where's it going? So what do we find? We find there were some obstacles. Critical mass, as I mentioned, this is not a huge part of the stream, and it was going in different pathways, so getting enough of it to do something with can be a challenge. Variability in the stream, there are lots of different kind of packages. Those photos there are from a December bale sort that we did. So you see there's some that are opaque white with a heavy label. There's browns, yellows, greens, blues, all kinds of different types of color. The markets for this tend to be a little lower value. And certainly now, as you know, with some challenging markets out there, we're looking to sort of identify some higher value markets into which these materials might be sold once processed. So next steps on this, we continue to look at potential end markets, potential technologies, potential partnerships. We hope to do some additional testing and other, we move this forward this coming year. We continue to do more research onto end markets, what other end markets might be out there, other technologies might be appropriate for this kind of material. So this is something we continue to work on and hope that we'll still continue talking to our other folks in this industry, MRF partners and others, end markets, about this material as we move forward. Let's talk about PET thermoforms as well. This was, I mentioned, we had two more non-traditional streams that we wanted to talk about that we were working on addressing obstacles to recycling of these streams. So PET thermoform recycling, we've been working on this as NAPCOR for some time now. In terms of, well, our goal is stated right there. We want to make recycling of these packages, like that strawberry package there, the non-bottle PET thermoform packaging, as easy as it is to recycle PET bottles. Having said that, we want to do that without causing disruption to the current bottle recycling infrastructure. Showed you those charts before. We have about 2.7 billion pounds of capacity for reclamation. We don't want to disrupt that. We know our reclaimers have some yield challenges. We don't want to contribute to that. So it's a complex goal, and it's something we've been working on for a while now. Strategies, we want to make sure, as mentioned, our thermoformer or reclaimers are on board and are accepting of change, and to communicate consistently across the chain, the value chain. Before I move on, I'm just going to clarify something. You know, what is the issue with thermoforms? Why would they not just be a slam dunk for recycling since they're PET? And it's true, they are PET, and they are certainly technically compatible with bottles in the recycling stream. The issues have been varied. PET thermoforms look very much like other thermoforms made from other materials, and therefore can pull in more non-PET contamination. Pull in lots of ways. They literally sometimes wrap around things in a compacted bale. And they also, once you acknowledge that you accept thermoforms, other ones sort of sneak into the process, contributing to the non-PET fraction of the bale, which of course we don't want to do. They tend to have a wider range of configuration and specs than a bottle does. They have more variance in some of the PET chemical properties, like the intrinsic viscosity. They tend to create more fines. They're just slightly different, and so as with slightly different than bottles, that is. So they are not currently as preferred a material as bottles. So that's something that we continue to work on. But there are no real showstoppers here. It's just more of understanding the material. Again, we talked about design for recycling. You know, we've worked. Let me go to the next slide and show you some of the history here. This is really just to show that we've been working on this for a while. But I mentioned design for recycling early in 2009, 2010. We worked with the Canadian Retail Initiative. We worked with the APR and others to start addressing design for recyclability with respect to labels and adhesive, which tend to be a little bigger. The label's a little bit more aggressive with thermoforms because of the way they function in the marketplace. So we've been working on these issues for quite some time, since we first opened up our NAPCOR membership to sheet and thermoform member companies back in 2007, 2008, and we have continued to work on this issue. Wayne may recall back in 2011, 2012, the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center was involved in a grant that we did to test various some market scenarios for thermoforms in the U.S. So point of this being just to show that we've worked on this for a while and we'll continue to work on it. So mentioning the bale sort that we do, I don't have the bale data for 2015, but I can tell you this is the percentage of thermoforms in curbside bales based on our average calculations from the bale composition analyses that we do. I can tell you for 2015, it looks like it's coming in at over 8%. So year over year, we're seeing more PET thermoforms in an average PET bottle bale. What's happening with these thermoforms at the moment? Well, they're being recycled. This is recycling volumes of thermoforms recycled over the last couple of years. So, for example, in 2015, over 60 million pounds of PET thermoforms were recycled in the U.S. and Canada. Our exported number went down in 2015, and our domestic number went up just slightly, from just below 60 to just over 60. So we are recovering this material in the U.S., but our PET thermoform is recyclable. You've heard me kind of parse it out a lot and give you some yes but no kind of direction. So let's talk about that a little more and talk about this. This is a very recent sort of development with PET thermoform recycling. So there was the recent availability of recycling study, which looked at the access or the availability of recycling of various materials to U.S. consumers. And it's a publicly available report. There's a long link at the bottom below the chart there. But it was in the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, the SPC, was the lead organization. NAPCOR was one of an assortment of funders for this project. So if you Google SPC availability study, it'll come right up. But basically, the study found that over 60% of U.S. consumers have recycling programs that allow them to recycle their PET thermoforms. You can see there on the chart at the bottom there, PET cups and trays and clamshells, all 60% or more of the U.S. population was determined through this study to have access to recycling. Now, why is this important? Some of you may know this, but just for others who aren't familiar with this, the Federal Trade Commission has environmental guides, or green guides as they're known, that set guidelines for claims you can make on packaging pertaining to environmental claims. And the FTC has determined that to be recyclable, a package has to be, you have to be able to recycle it. So as a consumer, you have to be able to recycle it for it to be called recycling. And they have set a guideline of about 60%, at 60% as meeting the guideline for readily recycled. So that was good. We thought that was good, and we were pleased to see those results. But we thought, well, the FTC also indicates that getting into the recycling bin is not quite enough, and so, but they're not particularly specific about the next part of that. The next part of that would be there has to be a reasonable assumption that the material will actually be processed into an end product. So we thought, we at NAPCOR thought, well, why don't we take this to the next level? So we surveyed major MRF companies and our PET reclaimers to ask, well, what do you do with PET thermoforms when you get them? And for MRFs, for the most part, the MRFs that responded, the major MRFs that responded, indicated that PET thermoforms collected at curbside are being sent to PET markets, primarily in bottle bales. You know, occasionally in a thermoform-only bale, but really that's not very common, usually in bottle bales. Our PET reclaimers, for those who handle curbside materials, they generally recycle PET thermoforms along with bottles. Is that always the case? No. There are still some reclaimers who would prefer not to receive them, and certainly reclaimers who deal primarily in deposit material, whether traditional deposit, whether California CRV, they don't get many thermoforms. They're not part of the program, and so they don't typically want them. So there is some nuance there, but generally speaking, we found through our surveys that if you put your thermoforms into a bin, if your community accepts them, they have a very strong likelihood of making it to end market. So I mentioned the Sustainable Packaging Coalition as being the lead on the availability of recycling study. They also have the How to Recycle label that many of you may be familiar with. So because of the availability of 60% or over, and also because of the work that we did doing the additional surveys, PET thermoforms will get a widely recycled label in the SPC How to Recycle program, with the exceptions that are noted there. That is exceptions that the SPC have indicated that they will put on their label. And this label is for participating brands that choose to. It's a voluntary label. So, moving just to go back to how NAPCOR reclaimers perceive this. This is the NAPCOR statement. This is the statement. I'll let you read that. So, what we do encourage is that, and we've highlighted it in green, is that you talk to your buyer. If you want to market PET thermoforms, you talk to their buyer about the specifications. This is certainly something that is moving forward. I think we're seeing more prevalence in bales, as I just pointed out. We're seeing more acceptance in the marketplace. But we're also still doing work on addressing, really understanding this material and addressing technical or design for recycling concerns insofar as we're able, and working through that process. So please talk to a buyer about specifications if you want to market these materials or change the way you market these materials. Now, I've gone through this rather quickly, but my colleague Risa Domino has written a very good article on behalf of NAPCOR that was in the November issue of Plastics Recycling Update, and it goes through this process. It goes through the availability study and the sort of the history of this. It's a solid article, and if you can't find it, it was November issue, please let me know, and I'm happy to send you a PDF of this. Oh, actually, it's also on the NAPCOR website. If you look on the right-hand side of our news columns, you'll see it's maybe the first or second news item. You can get a PDF there as well. That goes through what I just talked about thermoform. So we've been working on this for a while now. We are making good progress on this, and this is a good update on that. So in conclusion, we went through 3 projects that are really trying to address in a sort of a detailed way quality and additional supply and non-traditional supply. We will continue to work on those projects. 2016 was certainly a challenging year for the recycling industry, and so now more than ever we focus on market support, trying to remove obstacles to successful recycling. So we do our part to facilitate recycling insofar as is possible. As I conclude, I just want to sort of use this as a contextual slide. This is an excerpt from the 2015 Recycling Rate Report. It shows recycled PET material flow. There's a link to reports on the top there, the top of if you want to look at these reports. It kind of gives me a chance just to emphasize that we look at all things PET very closely, and will continue to do so. We hope to keep the dialogue open with you, our partners in recycling, and especially PET recycling. And I appreciate your time today. I know I went through a lot of material rather quickly, so please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you saw something you didn't quite pick up where it fit in or what I was getting at. Please don't hesitate to contact me. And thank you. Wayne, back to you for questions, I think.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Great presentation. As you see, there's Kate's contact information. So at this point, we're going to be fielding some questions. Again, if you have a question, please enter them in the GoToWebinar dialog box. We did have a few questions that were presented during the webinar, and I believe Kate answered most of them in the following slides. So a lot were answered already. So we are getting some in now. So here's one question that's asked: are there any reclaimers taking pure PET thermoform bales?
Any reclaimers making them? At this point, I'm not aware of any. At one point a few years ago, we had a few creating thermoform only bales. I'm sorry, I'm backwards. Let me think about this for just a minute. Yeah, no, I don't think there are none that I'm aware of taking thermoform only bales. But there have been 1 or 2 in the past, so this is something that potentially could change. And I may not have the latest, but not that I'm aware of at the moment. It just seemed that they were better processed in with bottle bales for the most part. But if someone has a really specific question, or is looking for a market for something, contact me, and I'd be happy to try to help. But I'm not aware of any at the moment.
Is that because of a resin issue of what's made into a flake or a pellet? Is it different than say a plastic bottle?
No, I just feel that we tend to be running thermoforms more with bottles. I think the recycled product holds up a little bit better. It processes a little bit better when you blend it in with bottles. That's my understanding. We may be doing some tests on that, but at the moment, the understanding is that generally, if you can blend the thermoform product with some bottles, it processes better. And so there's not as much processing of a pure thermoform stream. We may test that. We might have other information on that. There may be other things that ultimately you can do to change your process to make that work better. But at this point, that's my understanding.
Yeah. As I recall during the study, I think the reclaimers wanted something around 15% max thermoforms in the bale. And
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where I suggested you check with your buyer, because there are different tolerances. Some reclaimers would prefer only 3%, and some will go up higher. So that's where when I mentioned please check with your supplier. That's kind of what I was getting at. Thanks, Wayne. Yeah.
And as I recall on the MRF side, that introducing thermoforms into the bottle bale actually created a better bale physically. So I think that was a positive.
Oh, I don't know that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ideally they're auto sorted, so you get less cross contamination, and they tend to compact a thermoform. So when you try to pull apart that bale, they grab stuff and they really compact it in the baling process. So that may have been what that was referring to. I don't know. I'm not aware of that.
Do you know how many MRFs surveyed sorted clamshell thermoforms with 3 to 7 plastics instead of bottles?
Yeah, some did. So I don't know if I have that with me. Let me see. I think we talked to let me see if I have that. I do have some of it. I have one MRF. I don't want to misconstrue this. I have one MRF where I don't know for sure. It looks like I have one that set it off to a perf, but I don't want to misspeak on that. I think the majority did mark it with PET, but not all. And so I could look into that a little bit more closely. I don't have those full survey results here in front of me. I have an excerpt, and it's not quite clear on my excerpt. So I'd have to get back to the person on that. I'd be happy to try to do that if it was important.
Okay. Kate, could you go back to the slide showing the flow of pet? I think it was one back, the last slide that you had.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That one there. Yeah, someone asked for that, so thank you. Okay. This question is, what are NAPCOR's thoughts / positions on PETG? PETG.
PETG, yeah.
It's not a rapper. Just kidding.
Well, PETG is used in some applications for thermoforms, where it works particularly well. I think what they may be referencing is the recyclability of that. It is not compatible with PET in the stream. It doesn't have a clearly defined melting point, so it tends to really gunk up reclamation assets when you process them together. So you really don't want to process them together. And I think that's been the source of some discussion in different contexts of late, in terms of the SPC resin code and whatnot. So that may be the origin of that conversation. Yeah, it is not compatible with recycling. The recycling streams are not compatible.
Okay, thank you. Can you speak more on the labeling concerns for PET or the initiatives ongoing to address the concerns?
Well, there's been a lot of work done on labels and adhesives, and the Association of Plastics Recyclers tends to be the keeper of. They publish the testing and guidelines for recycling compatibility on their website, and there are labels that have met the standards for labels and adhesives, and I believe ink sets that have met the standards for usage to meet design for recyclability guidelines, and they are posted on the APR website. Again, that's where you find those. But a lot of progress has been made in that area. Back from roughly 2009, we started looking at this. There's been a lot of progress made in that area. It still can be an issue. Because when you think about a thermoform, the label also may have to go from freezer to oven or microwave. It sometimes is a sealing agent. It seals the product in. It has a lot of functionality issues, and so we understand that. And so it's been a process to try to use different kinds of adhesive, different kinds of inks, and a lot of progress has been made there. And I suggest if someone's looking for an approved label to check out the APR website for that list of labels that have met the guidelines there.
Okay, I think that's pretty much for the questions. Thank you for everybody for posing those questions. So we're gonna close up the webinar. Again, this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, has been recorded and will be made available via YouTube links on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you, Kate, for presenting, and we hope you'll join us for next month's webinar. Please visit the NRC and RMC websites for schedule updates. And so have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Wayne, and all.